everyone, and it's really quite like quite something to be like in this kind of an audience. And may I just make a suggestion to kind of tone down the, I mean, it's like a little bit much too rock starish. It really felt like, off. So it's nowhere near like that. We've been fortunate at the Ken to have kind of stumbled upon something that we enjoyed doing and fortunately got product market fit. And you guys, taking cue from Rega, you folks were one of our first college subscribers. So I'm really, really happy to see so many subscribers and MBA students. So it's great to be here. Thank you so much. And sorry, before we start, an apology. I don't think this was the original session format. We've had like a couple of changes. So please do excuse any real time conversation which does not look very prepared, unlike many of the other guests, especially the Bain presentation. So I think today's session, this one will be the exact opposite of the presentation by Bain, which is like the other end of the strategy and preparation spectrum. Sorry,
but
to you.
This is going to be very exciting for all of us. This is Sarsh, this is Akshay. Hi guys.
Hi guys.
Thank you, Shobhit. This has been something very exciting for the both of us. Ken is probably the thing that I read every morning. And it's been absolutely amazing the kind of articles that the Ken takes out every single day. High quality journalism, impactful journalism. And to prepare, Sarsh and I have stalked you a lot on LinkedIn. And we have found every article of yours, gone through it, tried to do like a deep analysis. Nothing compares. Sarsh, you want to start?
So you've had a very interesting journey. You started off as an engineer, much like myself. Went on to do your MBA. When you were a business analyst, you worked in IT, you founded a tech startup, and now you finally entered journalism. It seems like a fairly eclectic mix. Can you walk us through that journey? Like, was this planned?
Sure. I mean, my first, I'm an engineer because my parents forced me to do my engineering. So I'm just I'm an MBA because after engineering, I didn't really want to be an engineer. So I said, hey, let me just go do my MBA. And this is, of course, like the earlier, next year, it'll be 2 decades to when I entered my B school. So things were different back then. It was all right to go and do an MBA without any experience, which is really quite silly now. Of course, everyone knows that. But back then, we were like engineering earlier, next kya karna hai, MBA. So it was like very logical progression. That's why I did both of them. And subsequently, my career has largely been a series of accidents connected together by, I think, my decisions to quit jobs and try writing a book. So I've quit 2 of my jobs, my first job as a business analyst and then in IT, because I thought, hey, this is not working out, let me quit and write a book. I mean, that didn't work out. I ended up in PR with Genesis Burson Marsteller, and I didn't like that. And I said, hey, this is not working out, let me quit and write a book. That didn't work out. And I ended up in journalism, which is what I really liked at Forbes India. And from then onwards, I realized business journalism was really what I liked. And I think subsequently, there's been some order of logic to my career till I actually ended up co-founding the Ken.
All right. Starting the Ken at a time when no one really thought the subscription model will work. The news industry at that point, or the media industry, did not see, at least in India, did not see much space for subscription-based news journalism. How did you actually decide that business journalism, business writing is where I want to be, and in that you decided you want to work on the tech startups and VC area? So how do you exactly make this niche a reality?
So it's not true that there were no subscription-based publications. It's true that there were none in India. Yeah. There were folks, I mean, of course, there have always been entities like NYT, WSJ, Economist, FT that have been behind a paywall. But around the time we started, there were also folks like Stratechery by Ben Thompson, I don't know how many of you read them, and The Information, which were doing niche subscription-based, journalism products, but largely out of the US. Right? So therefore we had a reference point. So the punt really therefore was that, hey, if we take something that's working in the US, why will it not work in India, right? That's a lesser risk than coming up with something which is completely like, unknown. And the reason why we ended up doing business journalism, because I and we have 4 co-founders, 3 of my co-founders, we worked together at Forbes India, we were colleagues, we were business writers. So this is what we really wanted to do. So you had that comfort with people who have a shared vision, shared passion coming together. And then you had this, look, it's working in other markets, let's see if it works in India. So that's how we kind of came about.
So on this specific segment mix of business, tech, startups, and VC, why did you decide to focus on this mix specifically? And what's the trade-off? How do you decide?
So again, many of these decisions end up coming from where you're originally comfortable with. I was a business journalist. I mean, 3 of us were writing for Forbes India. We were covering business, technology, Seema, one of my colleagues who's the editor, was covering science. So therefore this is what we do. And then the other thing also is that today, if you're trying to launch any kind of a subscription-based publication, you need to target it at a niche, because people pay money when you're reading a niche and not for a general product. And technology really today is something that everyone wants to read about. So that was like a no-brainer, technology and startups. And being out of Bangalore, it was like even more of an alignment. And science was largely driven because Seema is arguably one of India's best science writers. So, and because we were a small startup, we said, hey, let's do fewer things. So therefore, early on we decided we will not go outside these sectors and try to bite off more than what we could do. So, it's essentially a very reductive approach coming from what we knew and what we felt we could do.
All right. It's been 2 years?
Yeah, in October it will be 2 years since we launched actually.
Yeah. And ever since you started, it's been 2 years. I'm sure many startups don't see the light of day, finishing the year, and I'm sure even the 2-year mark it's a big thing. What are some of the key challenges that you faced, and what was the prime motto behind starting Ken, and do you think that you've been able to achieve that right now?
Oh, that's a very, very compound question. So I'm going to try and remember all the stuff that you said. So I think all startups go through phases of self-doubt. It just differs what kind of self-doubt it is. The first phase of self-doubt is is there anyone out there who's going to want what I'm producing, right? Which I would say essentially were our first 6 months. Is there anyone? The conventional wisdom was that Indians never pay for news. They never pay for journalism, right? So the first 6 months were that. We did not over-invest in anything, which is 4 co-founders and 4 staff writers. We had a very simple website, which was put together on WordPress with a theme. There was a $10 theme. We just wanted to see, will people pay if there is no fancy design but just stories? And fortunately enough, people were. And so you kind of get through that phase. Then you're like, all right, I'll make an app. I'll upgrade my website. I'll put more journalists. Can I get to X thousand subscribers, right? And that happened. And then you're like, can I convince an investor that this is potentially a much larger business, potentially a venture VC kind of business? And that happened because we managed to raise recently a round led by Omidyar Ventures. So now the next stage of self-doubt is, what more can this become? Are we limited to just one story a day? Are we limited to these sectors? Are we limited to India, or can we potentially take this outside these spaces? But at any given point in time, it's just that I'm going to fail, and this is my current stage of self-doubt. So I think the stage is just getting slightly more ambitious.
But have you had that aha moment that, it's here, the Ken has arrived?
Not really. I don't think many entrepreneurs will ever say that, because, the day you say that, you're kind of accepting that, there's nothing more, right? So at any given point in time, it's always that. So it's a mixture of kind of like the imposter syndrome, saying that I don't believe I've done this. Something is about to kind of go wrong. It's all going to crash. Someone is going to leave. Subscriptions are going to crash. So that constant self-doubt is what basically keeps you up. That paranoia saying that I must, protect what I have and continue to build upon it. I don't think any entrepreneur truly gets over that.
So what are the challenges that you face from big media houses, let's say, copying a model from a startup in the media space? It's fairly replicable. So how does a startup build a competitive moat around their product?
Sure. So when we started, I don't think there was any comparable product basis what we had. And I think many of the larger newspaper groups were kind of on the sidelines saying that, hey, let's see what these guys are doing, let's see where it goes. And now we do have a very direct competitor. Economic Times has a very distinct product called Economic ET Prime, which is pretty similar to what we do, right? So that said, I do not believe that it's very easy to replicate, what we are doing. And I'm obviously a biased party when I say that. Sure, you can replicate the model by saying, I will do X stories in a day, put it behind a paywall, but that's just replicating the structure of a product, right? The heart of a product is the reason why you say, that your emails are great, or your stories are in-depth, or there's narrative, and there's a lot of hard work that goes behind, right? All the people who work for us, we're about 25 people right now, and we're a very exacting, very, self-critical team. So what you see, what you read as a story is basically goes through an excruciating and gut-wrenching process before it kind of finally emerges out, right? I don't think that's very easy to copy, and you don't have to kind of believe me. You can be the judge of that. Just pick up our stories and pick up competitor stories and compare them.
On that very point, you talked about this very grueling process that it takes to actually publish a story. One story a day, 2,000 words on an average per article, and I'm sure a lot of work that goes behind doing this. How exactly do you maintain consistency in providing really good articles day after day?
So behind the scenes, even though we'd like to think of ourselves like a tech startup, we operate very similar to how a traditional newsroom operates, which is we have a newsroom, there are journalists, there are weekly meetings, there are stories, people make pitches, and then editors pick them up and slot them into calendars. And then different writers, someone's working on a story over a week, someone's taking 8 days, someone's taking 4 days. So, and then of course it goes through a editing process, etc. and all that. And then there's of course the 4 co-founders, who are kind of, again, putting another level. So it's nuts and bolts really. And if you really get down to I'm sure most of you know this, but typically startups in the first year or two, behind all the fanciness and flashiness that you see on their website or app at the back end, it's really a lot of manual process saying that, guys, get this going, this needs to go out, there's a lot of manual work going. So that's broadly how it is, right? There's no automation or algorithm behind it.
Actually, coming to something that even Shah said, since this subscription-based model seems to be working as of now, there are well-funded media houses, large media houses that are going to be, like you said, they were somewhere in the middle, maybe here, maybe there. There is a possibility that they will enter the space. Like you said, ET has entered this space. You also have a business standard, which is not completely the same, but also exists in this space. What stops well-funded media, consolidated well-funded media houses like a TOI to actually come and provide that level of quality that actually is the differentiating factor right now, Ken?
Sure. So this is a great question because, it's a question that literally any VC will ask you. This is the equivalent of, in the software space saying that, what if Google decides to do what you're doing, right? So in the media space, unfortunately, this isn't true because if you look at the history of media competition in India, typically whenever, like for instance, TOI, somebody has challenged TOI responds, the BCCL group responds by throwing money, resources, swamping the competitor, offering deals, discounts on advertising. But all of those strategies typically don't work when you're competing with almost like a guerrilla startup like us where you can't, all those don't work, right? So you can throw money at the problem, but what you're really trying to talk to your customers now are people like you and me, are the individual customers, right? You can't buy your way through them. No amount of throwing money, no amount of discounting is going to kind of win you that, because at the end of the day, if someone is paying money to read They really want to read quality. That's one point. The other is traditional media houses are at this disadvantage because their their core business is built on scale, the advertising model, and of collecting data about subscribers and connecting that with, right? And then you're building this competing business which is exactly the opposite, which is where I don't want data about my subscribers, I don't want advertisers, and I'm going to try and give really in-depth news to subscribers and let them read it, and I don't want anything else, right? The two of them, it's almost impossible for any one organization because they're in conflict with each other, right? If you try to go after, and it's already happening, so you'll see a lot of people complain about, hey ET, why am I paying you extra to read good stories on ET Prime? Why is it already not there in ET? It's a valid question, right? So traditional media, this conflict, it's not easy to kind of resolve. So,
all right.
A lot of the Ken's strategic advantage seems to stem from the team of journalists that you have. So what do you look for in a journalist when you hire them?
True. I mean, that's true because the product that we put out is our journalism, and the people making that product for, in our case, are the journalists. So you're right. And just a little bit of stepping back and meta point about that. One of the sad realities about journalism, and especially business journalism in India, is that far too few people are getting into it, and all the people who are in it are not adequately trained or are driven by the kind of journalism that ought to exist, right? So our biggest challenge right now is finding enough people who want to do the journalism that we do. We don't have a formula, except that we kind of most of the people that we've hired are people that we know, one of the 4 co-founders or someone recommended to, and then we go and look. I mean, one of the good things about hiring journalists is kind of like hiring a developer and looking at their code on GitHub. You can go back and see what they've done and you can judge their quality. So you can go to a journalist byline and you see how often have they been writing stories, how in-depth have been the stories, is there enough critical material? And then of course we still make mistakes, there's no doubt about it, but that's, the way we go about it.
As Ken looks at expanding, you have expanded right from Bangalore, you have offices now in Delhi and Bombay. When you expand your team, you are also inviting in journalists, good journalists with some level of political leanings, because everyone who writes, everyone who reads has some level of political biases. One of the things that Ken often does push forward is a neutral-ish standpoint, opinions, but at a neutral political balance, if I may say so. How do you manage to maintain this political neutrality right now, and how do you plan on doing this going forward?
Okay, again a compound question, so I'll keep stepping back. First off, we started in 3 cities all at the same time, right? So from day one we were in Bangalore, Delhi, Bombay. Second, it's not that the people that we're hiring are politically opinionated. All of us, co-founders, literally everyone has very strong political views, right? I will not say what those are, but we're very vocal on Twitter, right? And the third point is we decided very early on saying that, look, we are not going to cover politics at the Ken because it's like a lose-lose battle. We can't ever win, and therefore we're going to kind of impose a very strict firewall between individual views, political views of employees or founders, and the Ken's views. The Ken has no political views. The Ken does not cover politics. So therefore, when we approach something, for instance, if you're doing a story around Aadhaar or NPCI or Modi Care, we kind of go at it from first principles. If it's a bad policy, for instance, the e-commerce policy, right? If it's bad policy, we'll say it's bad policy and we'll say who's responsible. But we will not bring in politics into that. And I think our subscribers like us for that. And thankfully, it keeps us, focused on what we really want to do.
So the trend in the media industry has increasingly been towards short form, where consumers want soundbite sized pieces. You talk about Vox, you talk about InShots. The Ken, however, has decided to take a diametrically opposed view, going long form. So what was the rationale behind that decision? And does that mean you lose out in some consumer segments? What's the trade-off?
Sure. So, let me pass your statement saying that increasingly consumers prefer short form news. So that's the statement which is made in the aggregate, and this is the old style or the old world media world of approaching everyone as like a homogeneous segment, saying that I have audiences and my audiences prefer short form content or viral content, right? Where you'll see, and I think that model is kind of failed. That model was sustained by advertising, large media groups were supported by it. What you're seeing that model now evolve to, I'm not saying that's dead, but you'll see a lot of the evolution is happening towards people who are saying that, look, I don't care if there are 10 million anonymous audiences who prefer listicles and like, celeb content, but I really care if there are 50,000 consumers who want this kind of journalism and who probably will appreciate it and who will pay for it, right? So it's no longer that all or nothing approach. So earlier the thing was, look, 50,000 versus 10 million, it's no contest, right? So now there are, because of the internet, niche players like us can go and say, look, we just want these 50,000, 100,000 because they'll pay us really good money and they'll help us probably make more money than, 10 million anonymous subscribers monetized through all sorts of intrusive web advertising.
So going forward, you think that this space is likely to be dominated more by niche players, and you think the stranglehold of traditional media houses on Indian media or Indian news is going to go down going forward?
You'll see both. So for instance, you'll see niche players in the subscriptions place like us, the information, strategy. You will also see, post-Trump getting elected as a US president, there's a concept of the Trump bump, which is basically consumers are flocking to quality sources of information, right? New York Times record subscriptions, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, FT subscriptions, all of that, right? So you will see the established business houses put more and more of their content behind paywalls and more people, being willing to pay for it. And you'll see niche players like us, right? And then you will have, you will continue to have free, content. It's not going away anywhere. You will continue to have newspapers. But I would see those as commodity in that sense. I don't think, they'll go away, but they will not be very distinctive.
So, especially in the Indian scene, where the print journalism is dominated by a few big players. You have your TOI, then you have Hindustan Times, Indian Express, and Hindu. Where do you see these newspapers evolving in the next 5 or 7 years, where they see that there is an increasing trend of getting certain amount of trend of getting news online especially, and getting shorter news from Twitter and Facebook?
Sure. I cannot comment for their strategies because I'm not privy to them and it's unfair. But you can already, what I can mention is there's already early signs on how, BCCL is India's largest and most profitable media group, right? They're extremely sharp. They're not dumb, right? They have ET Prime. They've already soft launched a product which is called Times Prime, if I'm not mistaken. They'll be putting more and more of their products behind a paywall. There will be some version of Prime for Times of India, some version of Prime for Economic Times. They've experimented with, asking for email ID. So you will see them putting more stuff behind either soft paywalls or hard paywalls as well, but while keeping 80% of the content outside to get scale, because at the end of the day, they are an advertising driven media company. So they're not dumb, they're going to do both. The challenge now is them or others, how do they balance the conflict between, producing content for anonymous audiences and funded by advertisers versus real stories for real subscribers.
So you wrote an interesting article on how Facebook was using its customer base to market its lobbying efforts and had become akin to a media house, and this could have potential implications on elections going forward. You wrote this article, I think, in January 2016, and ironically enough, that did sort of play out in the Cambridge Analytica case in November 2016 in the US elections. But traditional media houses also do have political biases and leanings. So what makes social media so much more different, and what line can we draw? Where do we draw the line in terms of the ethical responsibility of such media houses to make sure that they're not influencing customers unduly?
Frankly, I don't think I have a very clear answer for this because I am extremely opposed to regulation as an answer for this, because typically regulation, especially when it relates to news media, flows from politicians, which is a very tainted place for regulation to flow from. And if, in today's environment, if you see, if there is any kind of regulation on media, you can already kind of choreograph how it will happen, right? The answer has to unfortunately come from changing consumer preferences. I don't think there's any other way, and therefore it's not like a shot. You already see a significant percentage of that change happening with Facebook. If you look at, possibly, I don't know how this cohort behaves, but if you look at the number of people who've started deactivating Facebook, if you look at the fact that Facebook's monthly usage time has been dropping, the number of people that it's adding has been dropping, the fact that it tries to insulate brands that it owns like Instagram from Facebook, right? So like they consciously don't use Facebook, right? So it's already a fact that people are tired of the way Facebook monetizes them and gets them hooked to their, so it's happening with Facebook. It will happen with bad media, products as well. It's just a slower slower process, right? I think it will happen in India as well. You see that happening with TV journalism. Number of people I know who've stopped watching TV journalism or stopped owning a television altogether is really significant. I haven't owned a TV for like 7-8 years now, but there are more and more people that I find. So, so all of these together, right? Together with the fact that people are willing to pay for subscription, these are all small changes. Unfortunately, in a country as large and diverse as India, it's very hard to see all these as some kind of a simultaneous, homogeneous change. So you can say, hey, look, change has happened. It's just happening all around us in various ways. So we can't really spot it and put a finger on it so easily.
You talked about regulations some time ago, especially regulations stemming from the political class. You have, Ken has written 450-ish articles now in the last 2.5 years, about 2 years. The first article that you wrote, there was some legal ramifications. I remember reading, there was an article about Go Java.
Yes.
Ever since then, I think that's one of the first few articles that you wrote. Has there ever been a point where you felt that this article might lead to some legal ramifications and I do not want to write this? Just pointing the question the question that I'm asking is very often journalists in India are accused of self-censorship, either because they are afraid of pissing off a political master or a business master. Has that ever been a consideration for you when you're writing your articles?
So, quick context, the very first article that we wrote was about Jabong, and it got us sued. And the article still can't be viewed because we had to take it down, and then we got sued in Bihar in one jurisdiction. And then we did another article for which we got sued in a different jurisdiction in Bihar, all by the same person. And then we kind of appealed to the Supreme Court saying this was basically, this is what happened with Caravan magazine,
exactly.
Right? And then we went to the Supreme Court and said that, look, this is basically what's happening. And thankfully the Supreme Court clubbed those cases and granted our request to transfer them to Bangalore. It just happened last month. We've been sued for a couple of other stories as well. We've never not done a story because for fear of getting sued, because those contexts that you mentioned, that your political masters might get offended or business masters might get offended or advertisers none of those exist for us. We don't cover politics. We don't have a media house that backs us, so we have no one to answer to. We don't have advertisers who can threaten to pull out advertising if we do some stories. We only do stories for our subscribers, and if anything, whenever we've done hard-hitting stories, subscribers have typically tended to kind of support us and our subscriptions have gone up, right? So that said, yes, we are very careful because business journalism is one of the most thorniest spaces to get sued in, because people will let go of political stories, but especially in India, if you write something it's trivial for like a large business house or like company to sue you, and for them it's just like a few lakh of rupees. For you it's like couple of years of like the case dragging through.
If I'm not mistaken, Paytm is one of the investors in the Ken. How do you handle conflict of interest if you have to write an article, or you have written a few articles about Paytm? How do you actually handle conflict of interest in a case like this?
Sure. So Paytm is not an investor. Vijay Shekhar Sharma, the founder of Paytm, is one of our angel investors. He holds a very small stake. Our approach towards conflicts of interest is first and foremost to aggressively disclose it and be transparent about it to readers. So typically in any story where there is any investor or any investors, investee company also mentioned, we will star it and we will mention, disclose it. That's something which you will not find in most Indian, like for instance, I don't want to take names here, but like most Indian newspaper groups have private treaty deals with like lots of, you will never find a mention of that, right? So we disclose our conflicts so often that many of our subscribers write to us and they think something is wrong, saying, guys, what's wrong with you? Why do you say so often that, so and so is an investor? And then I have to kind of write back to them and tell them that, look, it is not we who are at fault, it's you, it's the others who don't disclose often enough, right? So I think the only way you can handle this is through disclosures, and let readers make up their mind.
So do you take inspiration from any foreign media houses that you see as a benchmark, let's say, of quality journalism, and something from, let's say, abroad that you would want to see in the Indian landscape going forward? Like we see a lot of increased polarization in India, all of those problems with the media. What's the one thing that you would probably want to change, and how do you think that can be achieved in the next 5 to 10 years?
Both of you guys are like amazing at compound questions. There's so many questions. So first off, we're not specifically inspired by anyone. Like for instance, like it would be hard for any journalist in the world to say that they're not inspired by the kind of brand the New York Times is, which does not necessarily mean that we are trying to be the New York Times. We can never be, we're not trying to be. And to your question about polarity, it's a reality all over the world, right? Like what we try and do is by largely staying clear of it, saying that, look, we are a business journalism website. So sure, there is polarity. I'm sure you have your views and I have my views. The best way to handle that is just by not talking about it, because we don't cover politics. That's a line that we've chosen, right? Because otherwise, I don't think there's any easy way to kind of go about doing it. Whatever you do, if you're going to touch politics, you will end up on one side of the spectrum or the other, whether you're in India, whether you're in the US, whether you're in England, anywhere.
So on that question, when you're covering business and when you're covering business extensively, there are points that you touch upon policy, there are parts where you touch upon regulation. Sometimes it is inevitable for you to brush on politics or give some even third degree commentary on politics, which might not be directly intended. How do you actually maintain that sanctity that you do not move even anywhere close to politics?
So that part's easy. We are actually very opinionated when it comes to criticism of bad policy or trying to trace back origins of bad policy to the actors, whether something came from, hypothetically, Niti Aayog or NPCI or the PMO. So we will criticize that, right? But I think our readers, thankfully, are smart enough to realize that we are criticizing a policy and the people behind that policy, and not necessarily the government that's elected. Of course, they intersect at many times, right? So we will, for instance, if we have to criticize a particular aspect of Modi Care or how it's implemented, you will have to criticize it. But, because our readers are thankfully mature enough, they don't write back and say, why are you criticizing Modi Care? Because criticizing Modi Care is equivalent to criticizing Mr. Modi. Sometimes it happens. We did a story, my colleague did a story on the Aam Aadmi Party government's, move with, really good move with primary healthcare centers in Delhi. So we got a bunch of mails from people, mostly free subscribers, saying that this is like PR for like the Kejriwal government. And we are like, how? We are talking about an initiative by a government, which is not the same as saying, hey, go vote for the Aam Aadmi Party, right? But I mean, this is all part and parcel of like, doing this journalism. The people will write to us, and sometimes it's some of the mails are interesting. Let's just leave it as that, including our replies as well.
On that very point, as Ken is looking at expanding its subscriber base, honest question, do you think you can maintain, especially in India, a very mature audience who's able to separate politics from your writing? And who does not get riled up about every time somebody is mentioned? You think the Indian
absolutely, like,
base, yeah.
I mean, I think that's it's not even a question, because in a country the size of India, even if I ignore everything other than top, let's say 4, 6, 8 cities, and just look at the number of people and say how many of them would want business journalism from us and nothing else, because there's enough media sources out there to give them politics and celebs and sports, etc. and all that. And it's like, the audience is like easily in like a low digit couple of millions, right? Not everybody wants everything from the same media source, right? Like, it's all right to say, I will read X for politics and Y for sports and the Ken for business. And there may be people who say, I wish you do politics, but we will continue to disappoint them, I think, for probably as long as we exist.
You've recently started Ken on the weekends as a sort of a different product offering. What are your plans with that new sort of offering? How is it going to be different from, let's say, the weekday articles?
Sure. So this is, I mean, right now we are at a point in our evolution where we're trying to figure out, like, okay, our like original this thing was we do one story a day through the week, hardcore business stories. But as journalists, we've always wanted to do more weekendish feature stories, and like, stories which are not, so reportage driven hardcore business news. That's where you see us going with our weekend stories. We've started doing stories on Sundays, sometimes on Saturdays as well. We'll probably also experiment with formats like podcasts, deeper Q&A interviews, possibly even like, going outside India for some stories and stuff like that. But these are all early experiments right now for us, because I think there was early on, it was in the Bain presentation where he said that, look, keep your core constant and experiment around the edges with product extensions. So that's what we are doing. We've got our core constant. We're trying to figure out what do we do on weekends. What is it that subscribers would love to get from us on weekends that we can ideally execute? If we get product market fit, hopefully in the next 3-6 months, then possibly maybe we'll spin it off into a separate product. Otherwise, maybe roll it back in or do something else.
All right. Last question from us. The Ken has recently, and congratulations for that, the Ken has recently turned profitable. On top of that, you have been able to secure a massive funding from Omidyar, as you said. What exactly is the future of Ken? What is exactly your future in this entire venture?
If I knew that, like,
right up to you.
Yeah. So yes, we are profitable. We turned like a small profit. We've got a fairly large newsroom. We turned profitable, and the funding that we raised wasn't massive by any standards. We raised about $1.5 million.
Big enough for news.
Yes, for a niche subscription-driven media company, it's a decent size of funding. I don't know what our future will be. I can certainly tell you how we are kind of growing. We would like to become kind of like a new media entity that is focused exclusively around subscribers, subscription journalism in various manners and forms, right? So if we keep that as our constant, we can kind of try and figure out what are the kinds of articles that we can do, in which geographies can we do it, which audiences can we do it for, what formats can we do it for. But I think our core will continue to be for subscribers and ideally paid for by subscribers.
All right. So I think that wraps it up. I think we have a few questions from the audience. few questions
cool.
from the audience.
We have one question for you from Mr. Divyansh Kolyan. Mr. Divyansh, if you could raise your hand, we'll get you the mic.
Rohin, so I just wanted to know, like long form every day, every work, the whole work week you do one story in a long form. So do you feel that there's some kind of content fatigue in your audience, or do you find that they always want more? Because not everybody is used to reading, long stories each day of the work week. Along with other publications we subscribe to, you're only for business. You may be reading something for tech, something for politics. So is that something that concerns you?
Not really, because you're not meant to read us every day, frankly, right? So it's like any publication that you take. When you get a newspaper, you don't read every story in the newspaper every day, and we're like that, right? We do 5 stories a week. It's possible that you maybe just like 2, and that's fine. So the way we look at it, every story must earn its time with the subscriber. If it doesn't and the subscriber doesn't read it, so we have a problem when someone says that, look, it's been a month since I read anything on the Ken, right? Or it's been 3 weeks. But if someone says, I don't read all 5 in a day, I'm perfectly fine with that. I mean, if someone said, I read all 5 in a week, I would really want to meet that person and probably gift him a subscription.